Aloha, Gary Kim. Listeners, thank you for tuning in to hear from Gary McKinney, who is Western Shoshone and Northern Paiute by heritage and a spokesperson for the people of the Red Mountain. Gary is here to shed light and inspire action to protect Pihimaha, aka Thacker, from potential construction of a massive lithium mine in Northwest Nevada. What we know to be what is known today as Nevada, but we know that's not its original name. We would like to first thank the Tongva ancestors for their enduring presence, legacy, and stewardship of the area. Our show comes to you from the ancestral homelands of the Tongva, and we invite you to align and support with local First Nations and their homelands wherever you live. Lithium is essential to all battery technology currently in use and development worldwide today. Due to decreasing demand for oil amid climate risks and rising costs, peak oil production, and momentum around net zero to address climate change, the demand for lithium is growing exponentially as electrification and the demand for EV, electric cars, and solar energy grows globally. While lithium is being touted as part of a clean green transition, many are rightfully crying greenwashing. There is a dark underbelly to lithium mining that is impacting Indigenous communities and people of color, their cultural heritage, sacred sites, and the totality of their health. We welcome Gary McKinney to reveal the true cost of lithium and what we might do to protect the Northern Paiute and Western Shoshone sacred site of Pihimaha from lithium mining, and to ensure Indigenous peoples and their legacies are not irreparably harmed by the world's growing hunger for lithium. Welcome, Gary. Thank you so much for standing so strongly for the legacy of your people, the lands, waters, and cultural inheritance of your ancestors. And thank you for your patience today. We had to jump through a few hoops to come on together. But is there a specific way you would like to open the show?
Hello, everyone. I'm Gary McKinney. I'm a Shoshone Paiute. In our traditional language, it's Nuwa Numa. I come from the ancestral homelands of the Paiute, the Shoshone, and the Bannock. I come from the Panakwati band of Shoshones, dating back to the 1800s, and so there really is no specific way that I would want to open up the show rather than walk everybody in with my introduction and welcome you to the show. And I appreciate the listeners, and please help us do what you can to support. Thank you for listening.
Could you begin, Gary, by telling us what is the meaning of Pihimaha, and also what is the special cultural significance it has for your peoples?
Pihimaha is the traditional name for the traditional, well, we'll call it the tribal cultural landscape that is under fire. The Thacker Pass lithium proposed mine is in Humboldt County, Nevada. It's northern Nevada, southern Oregon area, and we have a lot of ancestral history between not only the Fort McDermott Paiute tribe, but also with the Shoshones and the Bannocks. And the significance of Pihimaha is that Pihimaha translates roughly to rotten moon. And the reason for that is one of two. The primary reason for it being called rotten moon is because we'll go back now to about, we'll say before the Civil War, around that time, 1860 to 1865, when the Paiute warriors were away from their village, and upon their return, the smell of rotting flesh was in the air, and under a full moon they rode back into camp, and it was there that they found the remaining, there was children, elders, women, and all their belongings were back there. Entrails were back there, limbs over here, and and that is the reason why we call it rotten moon, Pihimua. And that is only one account of several, I would say, um, that happened in the area. There are a lot of cultural or significant sites in Thacker Pass.
Mhm.
And if we call it Thacker Pass, we're talking about a square box. But if we're talking about the entire tribal cultural landscape, then
Mm,
we're looking at something a little different. It's a
mhm.
wider scope with more people, more history, and that should translate to more policies to protect that stuff. But at this point, it is not. The
Mhm.
Trump administration in January of last year has fast tracked or expedited this mine here so that it could go through.
Mhm.
And we have been asking them for consultation at the beginning because they came in at a time when COVID was running rampant on our reservations.
Mhm.
Everybody was on a stay-at-home order, and yet they continued to come in and want to do those meetings at that time, and nobody wanted to get sick. Our
Mhm.
elders needed to be protected, our little ones needed to be protected, and so we left it up to that tribal council there to speak about our history in a good way.
Uh-huh.
And when all else fails, the people of Red Mountain Committee, um, in present times, is a group of descendants that came forward at this time of the mine. It was being fast tracked. Atsakwadakwa Atsakwadakwa is a traditional name of a Paiute band of Indians in that Fort McDermott area. And so there's all kinds of significance in there, and we'll talk about it more. But that's the general gist of Puhimaha, aka Thacker Pass.
If meaningful consultation had really taken place, what do you feel that that would have looked like? Because we all know, those of us who have stood for different things with EIRs, we know that they mean less and less, if they ever really did mean much. They're highly untrustworthy, and we know that the fast tracking just goes on no matter what, as if an EIR never happened, or the interests providing the EIR, we know that they are already kind of corrupted. So what do you feel meaningful consultation would actually look like?
Well, I can tell you what it doesn't look like, and we'll go from there. Right
Okay.
now, not a lot of right now. I'm using an internet connection,
Mhm.
something that somebody in a city might have in common with their neighbor.
Right.
Out here on the reservation, we don't have that.
Mhm.
We have we don't have the internet connection like that to stay connected. And nowadays, in this technological age, we're having Zoom meetings, we're having virtual meetings, and this is how that they are taking care of their business
Right.
on that end of things.
Mhm.
But then we swing back around, what about us? And so what this meaningful consultation should look like, say we have the eldest elder living on the reservation become notified that there's a mining proposal that's coming over and is going to want to take things, artifacts, and put them somewhere else where they don't belong. And that should involve that oldest elder there. Say there's on one hand you have the traditional elders, and then on the other hand you have, let's say the younger generation, which may not have those ties to that tradition because there's the boarding school aspect, and there's a lot of that generational trauma still present in our communities.
Mhm.
And we're talking about these boarding schools that we're supposed to trust in, in another god other than ours.
Right.
And that began the assimilation phase of our reservations,
Mm.
where children were ripped from their homes and their families were given, they call them now, HUD housing. But you talk around the fire, what makes a house a home? is love. You need your little ones, you know, from the elder, the parents, the kids, and that makes the home. What they did was they came in, pulled those children up out of those homes, and left everything in shambles. And now, at this point in time, you can. Some of our tribes are down on one knee as it is. It is unfair for these rich corporations to come rolling in roughshod and throwing all these things at them, when in the first place we should be taking care of ourselves, we should be taking care of our land, and so on and so forth. But as history as we know it isn't the same as American history.
Right.
And that is the significance of that area, because if we don't talk about it, it loses that significance. And so that is why we're learning everything we can about our history, where our people went. And you know, we weren't born yesterday, right? You know, matter of fact, we were born 2 nights ago. And so, as you know, as that goes, you know, we have a saying, you know, we know our roots, so we know where we're going. And that's all that this consultation process should entail wholly. You know, it should be meaningful, it should be free, it should be, you know, it should be that, not misinformation, not greenwashing, not take. It should be, you know, let's sit down at this table and let's bring our elders forward so that they know what is being lost. At this point in time, with fast tracking, those elders are shut out of the game. How was that? How was that fair? How was that saving anything? How was that NAGPRA? How was that ERFA? How was that protecting anything at all other than their mining jobs? Because we're seeing the Defense Production Act, we're seeing all these massive, all free jobs for 10.5 million people. And those 10.5 million people will be working and buying free internet. They will be buying charging stations. They will be buying every piece of metal in that electric vehicle. All the technology we use, that's what they're going to be paying for. And we're saying life over lithium, loyalty over royalty, because our roots, we remember our roots. And if we remember them, it doesn't seem like it's been 151 years. It feels like it was only our grandpa's time. And that's where Atsa Kudako Wanua is holding strong, is in that prayerful mode. You know, we're not out here painting a big picture or giving false information. No, we're sticking to our roots and we're speaking our truth. That's our voice there, and we have the documents to prove it.
Now, I heard you discuss that if Bahemaha was recognized as a historical site, you know, of these various things that had happened, whether it's the historical massacres, different things that had happened on these lands, that if this was recognized, that it would be a greater obstacle to the permit being granted to the mine. And how has that happened? Because is that just suppression of what is the truth of the history?
When we're playing politics, we got to think on the state level, we got to think on the county level, we got to think on the federal level. A lot of people don't understand that as tribal members, enrolled members of a tribe, we are federal already. We are, it's sad to say, but that's the way it is.
Okay, well, it was just about Bahemaha being recognized as a place of cultural significance historically, that should be an obstacle. You know, it's like a cultural heritage site and sacred, so it's like a burial site, right?
To that effect, you know, those massacres and things, how they are being managed in the federal court, is that they're assuming we had funerals, they're assuming that we had tombstones and we were colonized. But the fact is, before these treaties and things, we've never had those kinds of rights, those treaty rights. Those treaty rights aren't ours. They were brought to our attention by the outsiders. They were walked into the village and they sat down. And so that was that's what they wanted. To us, all we want to do is pray. All we want to do is protect that water for our future generations, because we're not the only we're not the only ones that's going to be alive on this planet.
Mhm.
We have to leave it in good condition for the next person.
Right.
And that takes a whole nother thing when we talk about the next person we're protecting might not even be born yet.
Mhm.
And that little one right there, you know, that if we can see things that way, that's life over lithium. And if we're thinking lithium over life, it's let's invest everything right now and we'll get it. But
Mhm.
what about the foundation of it? You're pulling the rug out from underneath a people.
Mhm.
Why? Then you ask, why are you doing that? Why are you lithium over life? Well, it's because this green energy transition is demanding, the president is demanding that we do this. Well, wait a minute, let's wait a minute. We back up to the 70s, and I remember Leonard Crowdog talking about this, and you know, watching old videos and reading old documents and things that you know, we have our creator, and we know that the creator to us could be the higher power. And what about the president? Everybody listens to the president. Everybody says the great white father, we listen to him. He's our God. He's the one we take our orders from. But to us, our church is Mother Earth and Mother Nature. So we look to the higher power, and that's who we answer to.
Mhm.
That's in our heart, that's in our blood, that's in our head.
Mhm.
But when you're thinking lithium of life, all that is gone. That's not a human being talking that, right? That's technology. That's that move
Greed.
forward that they want.
Just greed personified is what I wanted to say at that
Right.
stage, as you said, because we know that the ultimate game is the profits and the money and um, continuing to this extractive paradigm, as you often refer to, you know, the extractivism that is part and parcel of capitalism and Western culture, um, modern Western culture anyway, because we know it wasn't always like that, that there was also a time for all peoples of the world where they also existed in connection to nature. You know, in every single culture we can find that, but so much of that has been stripped away. You know, many different cultures went
Mhm.
through other kinds of genocides as well, you know, and traumas. But you know, I want you to clarify, we've talked about the tribal cultural landscape of Pihemaha and the much bigger area that it actually covers, but does it actually sit on reservation lands? I was just wondering, like, just trying to get a clearer view of that, where it actually
It's
would sit.
technically the Thacker Pass mine is sitting about 30 miles from the reservation line.
Hmm.
But there are farmers and ranchers that live within those 30 miles.
Mhm. And
Doesn't that make a difference? I
of
mean,
course, yeah.
it's still life. It's
Mhm.
still those people there that have been living in the Kings River Valley and the Orvada area have been, there's families that we can sit down at the table with and talk about the 1800s, and their families are still in the area.
Mm.
And so they're also wondering, you know, like why are they being shut out? How come they're not being heard? And they have a different version, you know, same dirt, different shirt on their part.
Right.
And
Gary,
so
if you could
but
just hold that thought for a moment. We're going to take a quick break and then come right back to talk more about protecting Pahemaha and stopping the Thacker Pass lithium mine.
okay.
So, Gary, we've been talking about the threats of the lithium mine for the Shoshone and Paiute peoples of the area. And I was wondering if you could speak a bit more about the actual threats to the environment. Like if you could talk about dewatering and the potential impacts on water that this lithium mine, which would be, I guess, the largest lithium mine on Turtle Island or on this continent, if you could speak more about the impacts on water.
On the water, okay. dewater, the dewatering process. Let me give you an example of what the dewatering looks like and what they do to cut corners. There is a mine in the Battle Mountain, which is Shoshone territory. There's Mount Tanabo there. Up on the top is a sacred spring, and the policy, the procedures and policies will say that as long as there's water flowing into that spring, it's okay. So they took all the water that from the water table that was pumped, that used to come naturally up out of that top of that spring. They removed that water table, dewatered it for their mine, and they start bringing water in from another area. So the water that's coming out of that spring on top of Mount Tanabo isn't its own water, but that's the corners that they cut. And so with the dewatering and stuff, you know, they do that with you know, they may do it with copper mining, but we know they do it with lithium mining. And this water here, the water they're pumping at if I remember 55,000 gallons per minute, and that's a lot of water. This is basically a project to mine water. The thing is with the water, and we're talking about cultural, you know, spirituality and our relationship to that water. You don't know how old that water has been sitting down under that water table. It's ancient water. So they bring it up onto the surface and it reacts. Then they want to dump brine into it. Then they want to evaporate it. All that evaporation and precipitation goes up into the sky. Policies and procedures will say as long as it doesn't fall within a certain ring, as long as it's outside of that ring, we won't catch anything for it. We're okay, we're good. And these processes and policies, you can go back and look at DuPont. And DuPont came in at one time and was speaking about how great and good this was going to be for the land. And if anybody doesn't know what DuPont is, from 1951 to 2000, there was a ton of lawsuits because DuPont was hiding test results. They were saying that, you know, those forever chemicals that were in the water weren't there. And once they were detected, they got the DuPont company, you know, because the thing about like, if we can't trust them with the water, because these companies mutate. You have their own group of scientists running their own tests. So they do their own self-monitoring. And they won't let us tap in. They won't say, hey, you know what, we want to see those results. And if we do say that, if someone was to say, bring us those results, it's a cat and mouse game. We might not get those results for about 6 months to a year down the road, and it might be doctored. And so we need true, absolute true results coming from the ground. Otherwise, you know, we're getting sick.